Day 94 alone. $0. 3 months of survival on pure will. Daniel Cole thought the island had taken everything from him, until he found her handwriting carved into driftwood. The woman who vanished 10 years ago. And she wasn't alone. He'd stopped counting days after the first week, then started again, because the loneliness got bad enough that he needed something to hold on to. 34 sunrises since the Marianne went down. The storm had come out of nowhere, a weather system that never appeared in any forecast, churning 12-foot swells 200 miles west of Micronesia. Daniel Cole had lashed himself to the cabin rail and fought it for 6 hours before the hull gave. He remembered the cold of the water more than anything else. The cold, then nothing, then white sand, and a sky so blue it looked painted. He was 38 years old, ex-Navy, 12 years in before a bad rotator cuff took him out of service. Since then, freelance marine engineering, contract work on research vessels, a life measured in departure manifests and diesel fuel, $200 in a checking account in San Diego, a studio apartment he rented month to month, nobody waiting. He'd had someone once. He tried not to think about her out here where the quiet got into everything, but some thoughts didn't ask permission. Some thoughts arrived at 2 a.m. when the stars were so bright they looked like they were falling, and he'd remember her voice, her laugh, the way she used to steal the right side of the bed and claim she was a right-side sleeper, like it was a medical condition. Mara Voss, gone for 10 years. Vanished without a word except a 3-line note left on the kitchen counter of their apartment in Seattle. Don't look for me. I'm okay. Please forget. He'd done 2 of the 3. On day 34, Daniel decided to explore the far end of the island. He'd stayed close to the eastern beach, the side where the Marianne's debris had washed ashore. He'd salvaged what he could in the first 48 hours. A waterproof bag with basic tools, 4 signal flares he rationed like oxygen, his grandfather's brass compass, a first aid kit down to its last 6 bandages. He'd built a shelter from driftwood and palm fronds, found a freshwater stream 300 meters into the jungle on day 3, learned to start a fire with a bow drill after burning through his lighter on day 11. Surviving was the easy part. He'd been trained for surviving. It was the silence that was killing him, not the silence of the island. There was no silence here. The jungle behind him roared with birds and insects from before dawn until long after dark. Waves hit the reef 200 yards offshore in a constant low thunder he'd stopped hearing after the first week. No, the silence he couldn't escape was the kind that lived inside him, the kind that filled all the spaces where there should have been something, someone, worth surviving for. The island curved west in a long arm of jungle he'd never investigated, upwind and uphill, and nothing over there that wasn't already on his side. But on the morning of day 34, he woke before the sun and couldn't go back to sleep, and decided that he was either going to walk the whole island or lose what was left of his mind. He walked west. 2 hours through dense jungle, broad-leafed plants soaking his arms with dew, fallen palms to duck under, the sound of the ocean always on his left. His boots, the one piece of luck that he'd had them on when the Marianne went down, were nearly worn through on the left heel. His cargo pants were torn above the right knee from a fall on day 19. He smelled like salt water and wood smoke and hadn't cared about that since around day 7. When he broke through the tree line onto the western beach, he stopped. It was different over here. The beach was narrower, protected by a crescent of black rock that killed the surf, leaving the water inside it calm and clear and blue-green down to the sand. And there was, he squinted against the morning light, a structure, not natural, post and beam maybe 12 feet wide, with a palm frond roof that was newer and neater than anything he'd built, and in front of it, a garden, actual rows, sweet potato, he thought, and something leafy he didn't recognize from this distance. Staked with care, the soil around them dark and recently watered. Living things tended by someone who understood what they were doing. He was jogging across the sand before the thought fully formed. The structure was empty, but the inside told a whole story. A sleeping pallet with a folded blanket, a small fire pit swept clean, a wooden shelf with organized supplies, dried fruit in a coconut shell cup, a collection of stone tools arranged by size, a child's drawing on a piece of flat bark, blue waves, a yellow sun, a small figure standing on white sand, and propped against the back wall, a flat piece of driftwood, smooth as a cutting board, with words carved into it. MV, day 97. Still here. The compass in his pocket went cold, or maybe that was him. MV. He'd read those initials on grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on his pillow for 3 years. He knew the particular slant of that V, the way she'd always made it slightly too wide, like she was reaching past the line for something just out of reach. Mara Voss. He was standing there, not moving, barely breathing, when he heard a sound behind him. Footsteps in sand. He turned. 40 meters away at the tree line, a woman stood with an armful of firewood, and an expression on her face he'd never expected to see directed at him. Not in anger, not after 10 years of silence, not after anything. Pure, raw terror. She was thinner than he remembered, dark hair longer, sun-bleached at the ends. A shirt repaired so many times it was more patch than fabric. The eyes, gray-green, deep water before a storm, were exactly the same, and they were fixed on him and not believing what they saw. And beside her, half hidden behind her hip, one small hand gripping the hem of her shirt, was a child, a girl, 8, maybe 9 years old. Dark hair loose around her shoulders, and eyes that were, he knew his own eyes. He'd been shaving in a piece of wreckage steel used as a mirror for 34 days. He knew exactly what they looked like. Those were his eyes. Mara. Her name came out of him like something he'd been holding underwater for 10 years, like a breath he'd been drowning on. The firewood fell from her arms. She grabbed the child by the hand and ran. Before we go further, if this story is already getting under your skin, drop a like and tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone disappear from your life without any explanation at all? Because Daniel had 10 years of silence about to shatter wide open. Keep reading. He didn't chase her. His legs started moving, pure reflex, before he made himself stop. 4 steps into the sand, then still, fists at his sides, listening to the jungle close around her. Think. She wasn't surprised to see a person on this island. She was terrified to see him. That was specific. That was personal. Whatever made Mara Voss leave 10 years ago was still chasing her. He looked back at the carved board. Day 97. He was on day 34. She'd been here for at least 130 days before he arrived. 4.5 months alone. Well, not alone. With no rescue, no contact, no way out. He walked back to his camp through the center of the island, the long way, where the jungle was thickest. He sat by his fire and watched the sky go from blue to orange to purple, and made himself eat 2 pieces of dried fish and a section of coconut, and he did not do the calculation already forming in the back of his mind. He forced it down. He sat with his grandfather's compass in his hand, solid brass, slightly dented on one corner, the inscription inside the lid worn smooth from years of touching, and he waited. She came to him at the edge of the firelight, just after full dark. She was alone. She'd left the child at the other camp. She stood 6 feet away with her arms crossed and her jaw set the way he remembered it getting set when she was bracing herself for something hard. "How did you find this island?" she said. "I didn't find it. My boat sank in a storm 3 miles off the reef." He kept his voice level. 34 days ago. She exhaled slowly, processing, deciding whether it changed things, for better or worse, that he was here the same way she was here. Accident, not pursuit. "I didn't know you were here," he said. "I wasn't looking for you. I know." A pause. "I'm not angry. You ran." "I know I ran." The fire between them held 10 years of silence. The ocean beyond it held everything else. "You look terrible," she said. It surprised a breath out of him, almost a laugh, almost. "How long have you been here?" 131 days. Her chin came up slightly. The pride that came from surviving something impossible, that she'd never been able to turn off even when it would have been easier. "I was sailing from Guam, a storm from the north, the same kind." "You were alone?" A pause. 1 beat too long. "No." He waited. "Lily was with me." Her voice changed on the name, softened towards something that would have split him clean in half if he'd let it. "She was below deck when the mast went. She wasn't hurt." He looked at her across the fire. The stars were out now, thick and low and close, and the orange light threw sharp shadows across her face. And he asked the question the way a man asked something when he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it said out loud. "How old is Lily?" Mara closed her eyes. "She'll be 9 in March." A long breath. "Her birthday is March 14th. The compass in his pocket weighed about 15 pounds. He had given Mara the matching compass, and his grandfather had 2. Always 2, 1 for each hand, he used to say. On a Tuesday night in Seattle, he hadn't made a speech. He'd just set it on the kitchen table and said, "My grandfather left me 2 of them." And she'd looked at it and understood exactly what he meant. He'd watched the understanding move across her face like light across water. That was 6 months before she left. He thought about March 14th, counted back 9 years and 9 months, thought about an apartment in Seattle, and a woman who'd told him she had to visit her mother for a week. Mara, I know. The crack in her voice was small but certain. Daniel, I know. The fire popped once. Beyond the reef, a wave broke in the dark. The stars moved the way they always moved, patient and indifferent and exactly on time. Okay, he said. Just that word. Just okay. Like it was the only thing left that meant anything. She opened her eyes. Whatever she'd been bracing for, it hadn't been that. He could see her working out what to do with it. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Neither are you. We'll figure the rest out. For a long moment she stood absolutely still. Then she nodded, one small motion like a door closing very quietly, and turned to go back through the dark to her daughter. She was 10 steps into the shadow when she stopped. There's something else you need to know. Her back was to him. Her voice was barely above the sound of the waves. About why I left, about who made me leave. Okay, not tonight. Something in how she said it. Not avoidance, but a woman who had learned to ration difficult things, like signal flares for when they were most needed. I can't tonight. He watched her disappear into the dark. He didn't sleep. He lay on his back on the sand and counted the stars and held his grandfather's compass in his closed fist and thought about a girl with his eyes sleeping on the other side of the island. 96 more days. He had time. Morning of day 35. Daniel was up at 5 a.m., which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he had somewhere to go. He made 2 portions of breakfast, dried fish and a coconut cracked against the stone, wrapped 1 portion in a palm leaf, and walked west through the center of the island as the sky shifted from black to gray to pale gold above the jungle canopy. He heard their camp before he saw it. Small sounds, the soft knock of wood being moved, a low voice, and then another voice, higher, brighter, a child's voice asking a question he couldn't quite catch from this distance. He stopped at the tree line. Mara was crouched in the garden, turning the soil with a flat stone, her movements practiced and unhurried. She hadn't seen him yet. 8 feet away, sitting on a flat rock with her feet tucked under her, was the girl, Lily. She was smaller than he'd registered last night, thin but not unhealthy thin, the kind of lean that came from living outdoors and running through jungle, not from hunger. She had her mother's dark hair but curlier, unruly, tangled from sleep and going every direction at once. She was wearing a shirt that was clearly one of Mara's, cut down and rehemmed to fit her. In her hands, a flat piece of bark and a stick of charcoal. She was drawing. She was frowning at the drawing the way a person frowned at something that mattered and wasn't quite right yet. Daniel stepped out of the tree line. Mara saw him first. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her pants. Her face was careful, not afraid like the night before, but not open either. Somewhere in between, like a door that hadn't decided. Lily looked up. Her eyes found him immediately, and they were dark brown, almost black in the morning shadow, exactly like looking in a mirror, and they assessed him with a directness that had no nervousness in it at all. "You're the man from the other beach," she said. Not a question. "Daniel," he said. "Yeah." She looked at her mother. Something passed between them, a question and its answer in a single glance. The private language of people who'd been alone together long enough that words were optional. "He's going to help us," Mara said quietly. Lily thought about that for a full 3 seconds. Then she looked back at him with those dark, evaluating eyes. "Do you know how to make rope? Real rope, not what Mom makes." "Yeah, I do." "Good." She went back to her drawing, already dismissing him, already moving on. "We need better rope. Her knots keep slipping." From 5 feet away, Mara sent him a look that held equal parts exasperation and relief. He set the wrapped fish and coconut down at the garden's edge and said nothing. He understood without being told that this was how it worked here. You proved yourself useful, and you were accepted. Lily Voss had not survived 131 days on a Pacific island on charm. He decided in that moment that she was going to be fine. Whatever came next, that kid was going to be completely fine. He spent the morning working. The Navy had given him that above everything else, the ability to find the next useful task and do it without needing to feel good first. He taught Lily how to braid coconut fiber into proper cordage. She picked up the pattern in 20 minutes, her small fingers moving quickly once she understood the structure, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in concentration. He reinforced the shelter's rear wall, which had started to lean on the windward side. He improved the fire pit's air draw so it burned hotter on less wood. Mara worked beside him and they talked about logistics, which was the only safe territory either of them had, and they'd agreed on it without discussing it. They compared resources. Between the two camps, 6 signal flares, his 4, her 2, enough dried fruit and fish for 3 weeks at 400 calories per day, 2 first aid kits with combined supplies, 2 knives, his salvaged fishing line, and her collection of stone tools that were significantly more refined than anything he'd produced. "You trained for survival?" he asked, watching her work a tool edge against a flat stone with strokes that knew exactly what they were doing. "Marine biology. I spent 3 weeks on a research station with no running water once." She didn't look up. "And my father's hunting cabin every summer growing up. He believed in self-sufficiency." The way she said father, flat and final, like pronouncing a word in a language she'd decided not to speak anymore, he stored away without comment. "You had a satellite phone? An EPIRB?" "EPIRB went down with the boat. Phone battery died on day 12. She set down the stone. "You?" "Same. Flares are it." He paused. 6 isn't much. "Then we use them strategically." She was already ahead of him. "1 at dawn if we see a ship, 1 at dusk if a plane crosses. We save 2 for the ridge." She gestured toward the island's interior, where the jungle climbed to a ridge maybe 200 feet above sea level. From up there, the visibility radius doubles, maybe triples on a clear day. He nodded. He was running numbers in his head. Flare range, commercial shipping lane proximity, average maritime traffic in this part of the Pacific, the probability of a random air corridor crossing within visual distance. He didn't share the math. The math wasn't encouraging. Lily appeared at his elbow without making a sound. The way she moved through the camp, that particular ability to be suddenly present that was either a gift or 131 days of practice. She'd been listening. "It might take a while," she said. He looked down at her, at the dark eyes watching him, not frightened, just waiting to see if he would lie to make her feel better the way she'd apparently had adults do before. "Probably," he said. She nodded once, like he'd passed something, went back to her rope braiding. Mara glanced at him sideways. He caught the glance but didn't answer it. He just went back to work. Mid-afternoon, he was checking the shelter's roof lashing when he noticed the drawings on the back shelf. A series of them, flat pieces of bark in different sizes, arranged in what looked like a deliberate sequence. The ocean from the beach, the island's crescent seen from the high rock, a cross-section of the garden with each plant labeled in a 9-year-old's careful printing. Lily's entire world, catalogued, and at the end of the row, a single piece that was different from the others. More carefully done, more time spent, a figure on the beach and a man standing at the waterline looking out to sea. Tall, dark-haired, something small and round in his right hand held loosely. The figure had been drawn and redrawn, the charcoal layered, getting it right. He heard Lily in the doorway behind him. "I drew that before you came," she said. He set it down carefully. "When?" "Day 60. She came in and picked it up herself, looked at it with the critical eye of someone reviewing their own work. I was on the high rock and I looked at the other beach and I just..." A shrug. The shrug of a child conveying something she didn't have language for. "I drew what I thought I saw." There had been nobody on that beach on day 60. He hadn't washed ashore until her day 97. He chose not to say that. "You're good," he said instead. Her chin went up. "I know." Then quieter. "Mom says I draw like my dad." A pause that was just slightly too long for a 9-year-old. "I've never met him." The shelter was very still. The afternoon heat pressed in from all sides. Outside, the ocean made its constant low sound. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. He meant it in more directions than she could see. Lily looked at him with those dark, measuring eyes for several seconds. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to decide she'd found enough of it. "Are you going to stay on our side?" she asked. "It would be more efficient. If it's all right with you and your mom." She thought about it with the seriousness of someone making a real decision, not performing the deliberation for an adult audience. Then she tucked the drawing back in its place on the shelf and walked out into the afternoon. He stood in the dim shelter and breathed. Then he went out to help with dinner. The fever started at 2 a.m. Lily woke making a small, sharp sound, not crying, just the involuntary sound of something wrong, and Mara was already moving before the sound finished, across the shelter in 3 steps. Daniel woke on instinct from his bedroll outside, one of the skills the Navy had left permanently installed, the ability to go from deep sleep to fully alert in the time it took a sound to reach him. He was in the shelter doorway in 4 seconds. Lily was flushed, her dark hair damp against her forehead, shaking slightly, the deep muscle shaking that came from a body working hard against something. He pressed the inside of his wrist to her forehead, field medic default, cleaner than fingers, and felt the heat before he'd even settled the contact. 103, maybe a degree higher. She's had this before? He asked. Once. Day 45. Mara's voice was controlled. Her hands weren't. She was wringing out a cloth in the water cup, squeezing and releasing, squeezing and releasing. It broke in 12 hours. That's good. Her immune system knows this one. He moved to the supply shelf without being asked, found the small bundle of willow bark tied with dried grass on the lower level. He broke off a piece, crushed it between two flat stones, dissolved the powder in water. It's bitter, he told Lily, but it'll help. Lily, pale under her flush, took the cup and drank it all without complaining, made one small face at the end, then looked at him with fever-glazed eyes and said clearly, "Thank you." He nodded, sat down on the floor beside her pallet. They took turns with the cloth through the night, cool water on her forehead, her neck, the insides of her wrists, trading it back and forth without words, in the quiet rhythm that happened when two people were working toward the same thing and had run out of anything else to say. At some point, Mara's shoulder settled against his, both of them leaning against the shelter wall while Lily slept between their shifts. Neither of them moved away. "She never complains," Mara said very quietly, around 3 a.m. The fond helplessness in it could have broken him if he hadn't been paying attention. Where does she get that from? A breath that might have been a laugh. I'm not. He looked at Lily's face, small and flushed and trusting the way sleeping children trusted, the way they trusted before the world taught them not to. One of her hands had found his at some point, the way it must have found her mother's hands 100 times in the dark on this island, and wrapped around his thumb. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. He didn't move his hand. The stars outside the shelter opening shifted slowly westward the way they did in the hours before dawn. The island breathed around them, and gradually, in the way fevers broke, not all at once but in degrees, Lily's shaking stopped, and her color eased from red toward pink, toward something closer to normal, and her breathing smoothed out and deepened. At 5:47 a.m. She opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, orienting. Then she turned her head and looked at Daniel directly, without the careful measuring look of the day before. Something had shifted in her face overnight. Something had been decided. "You stayed," she said, like she'd expected him to leave. Like the people in her short life who weren't her mother had a pattern of not being there by morning. "Yeah," he said. "I stayed." Lily looked at him for 3 more seconds with those dark eyes. Then she closed them again and went back to sleep, her grip still loose around his thumb. Across the shelter, Mara watched the two of them with an expression he felt more than saw. Something broken and whole at the same time. Something that existed in the overlap between grief and relief and didn't have a single name. He kept his eyes on Lily and waited for the sun to come up. 3 days after the fever broke, Lily announced that they should all live on the West Beach. She made the declaration at breakfast. Dried fish, papaya Daniel had found in the jungle on day 37, coconut water, with the calm authority of someone who had thought the matter through completely and was informing the relevant parties of the conclusion they'd been slow to reach. "It makes more sense," she said, not looking up from the papaya she was dissecting with a stone knife. "Daniel knows how to build better. We know where everything grows. Together is more efficient." She looked up briefly. "Also, it's lonely when it's just us." The last sentence came out with the same matter-of-fact tone as the others, like she'd decided it was data worth including. Mara looked at Daniel over Lily's head. "Efficient. 9 years old." The look said, "You see what I've been living with." "I agree," Daniel said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to the papaya. "You can put your stuff next to the north side of the shelter. I'll show you." He moved to the west camp on day 38. 2 trips through the jungle, everything he'd accumulated on the eastern beach. On the second trip, Lily walked with him, mostly quiet, occasionally identifying plants by their Latin names in the tone of someone sharing information they assumed everyone already knew, except that they'd just confirmed you didn't. She was entirely her mother in every way he could see clearly, and also, undeniably, inescapably, his, and he was still learning how to carry both of those truths in the same hands without dropping one. They were building a second sleeping structure, better windbreak, stronger frame, when Mara said the thing she'd told him was coming. She said it quietly, both hands occupied with lashing palm fronds to a support beam. Lily was 30 meters away collecting stones for the fire circle, her voice rising and falling in the private running commentary she kept when she thought no one was listening. "Do you know who my father is?" Mara said. He thought back. A dinner in Seattle in late March 10 years ago. Mara had been anxious about it for 2 weeks. The specific anxiety of someone dreading a performance, not a meal. Frank Voss, a man with steady eyes and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Real estate development, Mara had told him. He has money and he likes to use it to make people do what he wants. "I met him once," Daniel said carefully. "The dinner in March. You were nervous for 2 weeks beforehand. He's not in real estate." Her hands kept moving, precise and steady, like she'd decided the only way through this was to keep her hands busy. "He has a real estate company. He also has 3 others, all legitimate on paper, and 1 operation that isn't." He waited. "He moves money for people who have a lot of it that came from places that don't have names on paper." She stopped lashing, looked at the palm frond in her hands instead of at him. "I found out by accident when I was 26. A file on his laptop open on the screen when I walked into his study. I closed it and left the room. I thought maybe he hadn't noticed." 30 meters away, Lily was stacking stones and singing something under her breath. "He came home that night," Mara continued, "and he sat down across from me at the dinner table, just the 2 of us, and he told me what my options were." Her voice was even. She'd told this story to herself 1,000 times. She knew every word of it. Option 1, I kept quiet and lived my life, and he would take care of me, take care of everyone I cared about. A slight pause on cared about. Option 2, he would make the people I cared about into very difficult problems. The afternoon light came through the palm fronds in long, slanted bars, painting lines across the sand. "He mentioned you by name," she said. "He had your Navy service record, your ship rotation schedule, the bar where you went with your unit on Friday nights." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He said that problems for people in your position tended to look like accidents at sea." The sound of Lily's voice, distant and unconcerned, counting something in Marshallese. "So you left," Daniel said. "I left." She finally looked at him. Her gray-green eyes were flat and clear, the way eyes got when someone had already done all the crying about a thing and come out the other side. "I didn't know I was pregnant yet. I found out 6 weeks later. By then I was already in Honolulu on a research visa. I couldn't come back. If I came back to you, I led him directly to the one piece of leverage he didn't have yet." Her gaze dropped briefly to the lashing in her hands. "And I was terrified of what that would mean. For you, for whoever came with me." He felt the edge moving into his voice and couldn't fully stop it. "You could have told me. I could have. You were a Navy petty officer on $38,000 a year," she said. Not hard, just factual. The way a woman said something she'd turned over for 10 years and arrived at the same conclusion every time. He had $40+ million and decades of relationships with people who made problems disappear. There was no version of that where you protecting me ended well for you. He sat with that, wanted to argue with it, found he couldn't quite. "I kept moving," she said. "Pacific Islands mostly. Cheap to live in, hard to trace. Freelance marine biology work I could do remotely. I built a life." Her eyes went to Lily, who was now arranging stones in some kind of specific pattern that mattered only to her. She's never been to a mainland city. She's never been to a regular school. She speaks passable Marshallese and she can identify 47 species of fish by sight, and she's never once seen a shopping mall or a traffic jam or a snow day. She seems fine. She is fine. The fierce love in Mara's voice was the same force that had grabbed Lily's hand and run 3 days ago. The same force, just pointed differently. "She is remarkable, but she deserves a real life, and for 3 years now I've been trying to find a way to give her one, without my father finding out she exists." She stopped. He understood the rest without being told, because if Frank Voss found out there was a child, his daughter's child, he'd know instantly whose it was. He'd know what it meant, and a child was the only leverage more effective than a threat. "Show me," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Whatever you want me to understand. Whatever you've been working up to since last night." She was still for a moment. Then she reached into the front pocket of her cargo pants, the same pair every day patched at both knees, worn down to something soft, and brought out something small, a compass, brass, slightly dented on the left side. He recognized it the way you recognized your own reflection, not by thinking, just instantly in the place below thought. He reached into his own pocket, The two compasses sat together in his open palm, beside hers. Identical. Made in the same workshop sometime in the 1940s. His grandfather had bought both at a market in San Francisco, one for each hand, he used to say, until you find the right person for the second one. He'd given Daniel the right compass on his 18th birthday. He'd kept the left until he died and left it with a handwritten note, for when you find the person worth giving it to. Daniel had given that compass to Mara on a Tuesday night in Seattle, set it on the kitchen table without ceremony, without a speech. Just, my grandfather left me 2 of them, and watched the understanding move across her face. She'd kept it. Through 10 years of islands and running and building a life from nothing, she'd kept it in her pocket. He closed his hand around both of them. True north always finds you, he said. His grandfather's voice and his grandfather's exact words, the ones that had been inside the lid of both compasses his whole life. Mara made a sound. Just one, barely audible, small as a fracture, like something she'd been holding very tightly had slipped. Her eyes went bright and she blinked twice hard, fighting it back. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it. I am so sorry, Daniel. He could have said it's okay. He could have said you had no choice. Both things were partially true and entirely insufficient. We're here now, he said instead. All 3 of us. She nodded, pressed her lips together and held herself together. He gave her compass back, closed her fingers around it. She looked down at her own hand, at the metal in her palm, at the place where his fingers had just been and weren't anymore. The jungle around them was loud with evening birds coming in to roost. Lily's voice floated over from the stone circle, still narrating something to herself in the private language of a child at work. Daniel put his compass back in his pocket and picked up the next palm frond. They worked until the light was completely gone. That night, after Lily fell asleep, fast and absolute the way children slept who had used every bit of themselves during the day, they sat by the fire and let the silence be what it was. Not uncomfortable, not full of things unsaid. Just the silence of 2 people who had said the things that needed saying and were now sitting inside the aftermath, letting it settle. Mara spoke first, after a long while. She asked me about you, she said. Her voice was quiet, aimed at the fire. 3 months before we left Guam. She'd seen a photograph. Your face was on a maritime engineering registry I was using for work. A pause. She was very calm about it. She just walked up to me with my laptop and pointed at the screen and said, "Is this him?" He didn't move. I said yes. Mara exhaled. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, a brief pause. She said you had kind eyes. She said the people she'd read about with eyes like that were usually the ones who stayed. He thought about the drawing on the bark shelf, the figure on the beach, drawn on day 60, before his arrival, before any arrival. He thought about a 9-year-old girl raised between islands and research boats and Marshallese fishing villages, who had learned to read the ocean the way other children learned to read books, who had looked at a photograph of a man she'd never met and decided from his eyes that he was the staying kind. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wasn't already said. The fire burned down toward embers. Beyond the reef, the Pacific moved the way it always moved, enormous and patient and indifferent to all the small, desperate lives playing out along its edges. He was reaching for another piece of wood when Lily appeared in the sheltered doorway, barefoot, hair wild from sleep, eyes wide open and completely alert. "There's a light," she said. They both looked at her. On the water, absolutely steady. No uncertainty, no question. Past the North Reef. It's moving. Daniel was on his feet. He grabbed 2 flares from the supply shelf and ran toward the beach. Behind him, he heard Mara's footsteps, and then Lily's, smaller and faster, right beside her. The 3 of them hit the sand at the same moment. There it was, a light, 3 miles out, riding low on the horizon, moving northwest. A ship's running light, maybe a freighter, maybe a fishing trawler, maybe something that would pass in the next 4 minutes and disappear over the curve of the world and never know they were here. Daniel had 6 flares. He had never been less certain about when to use them. His hand closed around the first one. He fired the first flare. It climbed in a long red arc above the reef, burning for 18 seconds. He counted every one, and turned the low clouds above the water the color of a wound. Beautiful and desperate, and briefly, terribly bright. The light on the horizon didn't change. It held its course northwest, measured and indifferent. 3 miles away and moving at maybe 12 knots. He watched it. He did the calculation. He already knew the answer before the math finished. The flare had been visible. The ship had seen nothing, or cared about nothing, or had its watch rotation at the wrong angle at the wrong moment. All three were equally likely. All three arrived at the same place. The light got smaller, was gone. Lily stood at the waterline with her feet in the wet sand and watched the place where the light had been. She didn't say anything. She was the kind of child who processed in silence and came out the other side with conclusions, not feelings, or feelings converted into conclusions, which was the closest thing to control a 9-year-old could engineer. She turned around after a full minute, looked at Daniel with the dark, steady eyes. "How many flares do we have left? 5? She nodded, filed it, went back to the shelter without another word. Mara stood 6 feet to his left, her arms crossed, watching the empty horizon. The offshore wind was cold and smelled like deep ocean, the smell of distance, of the places between places where nothing lived and nothing stopped. That was the right call, she said. He wasn't sure. He was going to be unsure about it for a while, but he nodded. They walked back up the beach. 17 days passed. In those days, they became something, the three of them, that didn't have a clean name for it yet, and maybe didn't need one. A unit. A system of moving parts that learned each other's rhythms without discussing them. Who woke earliest? Daniel, always 4:50 a.m. by internal clock, Navy permanent. Who moved best through the jungle interior? Lily, who had given the major trees individual names and navigated by them the way other children navigated by street signs. Who knew which tides brought fish close enough to net? Mara, whose understanding of the ocean was 15 years of education and 5 months of survival compressed into instinct. They divided the island's resources with the precision of people who understood scarcity. 800 calories each per day. Daniel insisted on 2,200 for Lily, and she argued about it with the passion of someone objecting on principle rather than from actual hunger, and he held the line anyway, and she complained about it for exactly 2 days before accepting the extra coconut at breakfast as though it had always been there. He built a second shelter platform elevated 2 feet off the ground, better air circulation, drier sleeping surface, and Lily immediately claimed one corner of it for her drawing operation, her bark pieces and charcoal sticks arranged in a specific order that was not to be disturbed. She added a new drawing every few days. The tide pool on the North Reef, the banyan tree she called Arthur, the shape of the island from the high ridge, where all three of them climbed one afternoon, and stood looking out at the full circle of ocean and the tiny geography of their world, 200 feet below, impossibly small. "It's beautiful," Lily said in the tone of someone noting a fact about the weather. "It is," Mara said. Daniel said nothing. He was thinking about commercial shipping lanes and the curvature of the horizon and the radius of their remaining 5 flares, and he was also thinking about a 9-year-old girl who named trees and drew the world around her in charcoal and said the ocean was beautiful the same way she said dinner was ready. Like beauty was just part of the information. His grandfather would have loved her. The thought arrived without warning, and he took a slow breath and let it settle. Mara glanced at him from 2 feet away. She didn't ask. She was learning his silences the way she'd once known them. The navigational skill of someone who had mapped a person and then lost the map and found it again and was retracing the routes. "Your grandfather's compass is the left one," she said. Not a question. Just a thing she'd apparently been thinking about. He used his right hand. Always. He was ambidextrous, but he favored the right. He gave you the right one first. She paused. So when he kept the left, the one he gave me to give back to you, eventually, he kept the one that was closest to his heart. He looked at her. She looked at the ocean below them. "He knew," Daniel said slowly. "He gave me the right one, kept the left one, and left a note saying to give it to the right person." He stopped. He knew I hadn't found her yet. He gave me a placeholder. Mara turned to look at him then, and whatever was in his face made something in hers change. A softening or a surrender, the way a long-held thing finally yielded. Lily, standing 2 feet ahead of them at the ridge edge, observing the ocean with critical attention, said without turning around, "You're talking about the compasses again, aren't you?" They both looked at the back of her head. "Yes," Mara said. "Okay." She pointed southwest. "There's a dark water channel about 4 miles out. That's where the shipping lanes run. If any boat comes close enough, that's where it'll be. Fully practical, fully informed. We should build a signal fire on this ridge, something big enough to see from 4 miles. Daniel looked at Mara. Mara looked at him. "She's 9, her eyes said. "And also, she's yours." "Let's build a signal fire on this ridge," Daniel said. Day 55 of his count. Mara's day 186. They built the ridge fire. It took 3 days, hauling dry wood up the 200-foot climb, constructing a base that would stay stable in wind, surrounding it with green fronds that would produce a thick black smoke visible at long range. They worked in relay, 2 carrying wood while 1 minded Lily's camp duties, and by the end of 3 days Daniel's shoulders had a new set of aches layered over the existing collection, and Lily had named the ridge the Watchtower and appointed herself its official keeper. She climbed it every morning before breakfast, checked the horizon, reported findings at the campfire with the seriousness of a weather service briefing. "Nothing today," she said on morning 1. "Nothing today," on mornings 2 through 9. On morning 10, "There's a plane." They were both running before she finished the syllable. Small aircraft, single engine, heading northeast at maybe 4,000 feet. Private charter maybe. Or a small regional carrier hopping between islands. At current course and altitude, it would pass within 2 miles of the ridge in approximately 4 minutes. Daniel fired the signal fire. The dry wood caught fast. The green fronds went on immediately after, and the smoke column climbed straight and black and thick into the still morning air. Visible, he believed, he had to believe, for 10 miles in every direction. He held the second flare ready. The plane's course didn't deviate. He fired the flare anyway, directly up, maximum arc. The red smoke burned for 14 seconds above the ridge. The plane went northeast without changing angle. Got small. Became a sound. Became nothing. Lily stood absolutely still at the ridge edge, watching. Then she sat down on the rock, drew her knees to her chest, and put her face on her arms. She wasn't crying. Her shoulders were still. But she had made herself small in the way children made themselves small when the world had done something to them that they needed a moment away from. Mara moved toward her and stopped. Daniel saw it. That fraction of a second where a parent reads a child and decides whether to close the distance or give the space. He sat down on the rock next to Lily, close, but not touching. A minute passed. "Day 56 tomorrow," he said. She didn't lift her head, but she was listening. "When I was deployed in the Pacific, my unit went 71 days without mail. 71 days of nothing. No contact, no news, no voices from home. My squad leader, Chief Petty Officer Ramon, he said, don't count the days that didn't work, count the ones still coming." A long pause. The wind moved over the ridge. Lily slowly lifted her face from her arms. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. "How many days still coming?" she asked. "As many as it takes." She looked at him for a measured moment with those old dark eyes in that young face. Then she stood up, brushed rock dust off her knees, and said, "We should let the fire die down. The smoke changes smell when it's going out. We can use that for secondary signaling." She started down the ridge path before either of them moved. Mara looked at Daniel across the rock. "Chief Petty Officer Ramon," she said. "Never existed." He stood, dusting off his hands. But she needed the story more than she needed the truth. The corner of Mara's mouth moved. It was small and only lasted a second, and it was the first thing approaching a smile he'd seen from her in 55 days. And it went through him like the sun coming through the palm fronds, warm and sudden, and hitting the exact places that had been in shadow. He didn't say that. He just started down the path behind Lily. On day 62, the radio crackled. He'd been salvaging along the reef edge, a habit he'd kept from the early days. When he found it, a waterproof emergency radio, battered but intact, wedged in a crevice of black rock 20 meters from where the Marianne had shed its debris. 7 weeks in salt water and direct sun. Battery status unknown. He was sprinting back to camp before the thought was complete. The battery was at 11%. He powered it on slowly, like someone handling a thing that could break if handled too fast. Static. Then, distant and broken, but unmistakably, voices, a maritime frequency, a freighter's routine position check, the kind called in 3 times a day on commercial runs. Confirming position, EAR 08-22Y north, 149° I-17 east, heading 270. He had a position. He had them on a map in his head, northwest of Micronesia, well off the standard traffic lanes. Isolated, survivable, clearly, but the nearest inhabited island was a minimum of 180 miles. He held the transmit button and gave their position and status in the flat, precise syntax of someone trained for exactly this. 3 times, 30 seconds apart. Static, more static. Then, vessel broadcasting on 156. 8, this is MV Canton Star. We copy your position. Can you confirm the number of survivors? He closed his eyes for 1 full second. 3 survivors, he said. 2 adults, 1 child, age 9. No critical medical issues. We have signal flares and a ridge fire at position. Copy 3 survivors. We are currently 22 hours from your position at best speed. We are contacting Pacific Maritime Rescue out of Guam. Stand by on this frequency. He let go of the button. The battery dropped to 8%. He thought about 22 hours. About clean water and a cooked meal and a medical check and a bunk with actual walls. About what waited on the other side of all that. He thought about Frank Voss, $40 million and a name on his lips that was a threat. Waiting for 10 years. Patient the way money was patient. He thought about Lily, who had never been to a school, who had named every tree on this island and drawn its entire coastline from memory, and who, when the man at the Maritime Rescue Authority asked for a name on the other end of whatever phone call came next, had no legal documentation of her existence on this earth. He held the battery at 8% and thought about what he was bringing them back to. The wind moved through the camp. Lily's drawings were weighted down with stones to keep them from scattering, their bark paper edges lifting slightly, reaching the way things reached when a weather system was changing. He powered the radio to stand by. He had 22 hours and some decisions that couldn't be made alone. He told them both, not separately. Together, all 3 of them at the campfire with the food put away and the fire burning low, because Lily was 9 years old and had been surviving this island for 193 days and had a right to whatever came next at the same time her mother did. He laid it out clean. Position confirmed. Rescue vessel 22 hours out. Pacific Maritime Rescue contacted. The practical facts first, the ones that were only good. He watched Lily process each piece with her standard sequence. Absorb, file, evaluate. And he watched Mara do the same thing slightly slower. The way a person processed news when they'd stopped letting themselves hope for it. Then he told them about the battery, about 8% and decisions. He looked at Mara. Your father's reach doesn't stop at the water. She'd known it was coming. She'd been waiting for it since the first night, he thought. Waiting for the practical world to catch up to the emotional one, for the problem that hadn't stopped existing, just because an island had interrupted it. He'll know about the rescue, she said. As soon as my name goes into a rescue report, he'll know. Probably within hours. She was quiet. The fire was quiet. The ocean beyond the reef was its own constant low note under everything. Mom, Lily's voice. Precise, gathered. Her, I'm going to say, a thing now voice. Who exactly is Grandpa Frank? Mara looked at her daughter. She'd protected Lily from this. For 9 years, for obvious reasons that were excellent reasons and had also cost something real, in the way that protecting people always cost the protector. Lily knew she had a grandfather she'd never met. She knew they didn't talk. She'd never pressed, which was either wisdom or the particular restraint of a child who understood instinctively that some locked doors stayed locked for structural reasons. The door was open now. He's a man who makes it his business to know where people are, Mara said carefully, especially people who matter to him. And I matter to him. You do. A pause. Not because he loves you, because you're leverage, that's the word. Lily absorbed this with the same expression she used on difficult tides and dying firewood. Evaluated it. Set it down. So we can't just go home, she said. Not devastated, just updating the map. Not the way we were, Daniel said. Then we go home differently. She said it like it was obvious, like they'd been discussing a travel route and had just eliminated the route with the weather problem. We go home with a plan. He'd been thinking about the plan for the last 4 hours. He'd laid it out in his head the way he used to lay out operations, what assets they had, what vulnerabilities they were carrying, what the opposition looked like and what he could do about each piece. He was not a man who had $40 million or people who owed him favors, but he was a man who had 3 names in Maritime Rescue System, and a radio, and 14 hours left before a ship arrived. He told them the plan. The Canton Star arrived 17 hours later, just before dawn. A bulk carrier, Singaporean flagged, 200 meters of rust-streaked steel with running lights that turned the morning sea green and white. The signal fire on the ridge had been burning since 3 a.m., all 3 of them up in the dark, Lily fully awake and composed, her drawings wrapped in the waterproof bag from Daniel's original salvage, her charcoal sticks in her left pocket. The Zodiac came through the reef gap at 6:14 a.m., 2 crew members in orange life vests. Behind them, a third person, not crew. A man in civilian clothes with a satellite phone in his hand who stepped out of the Zodiac and looked at them with the specific professional look of someone who'd been paid to do a job and was checking whether the job had the right parts. He was wearing a ring, heavy gold, East Coast style, law school style. His shoes were wrong for a rescue operation. Too clean, too deliberate. He looked at Lily first. The calculation in that look lasted half a second. Daniel watched it happen and felt something cold and careful move through his chest. The man extended his hand toward Mara. "Ms. Voss, I'm Thomas Halley. Your father sent me to assist with—" "She's not Ms. Voss," Daniel said, even and quiet, standing 2 feet in front of Mara, not between them, beside her, which was different. Halley redirected his look, assessing. "I'm sorry? Her name is Mara Cole." He said it without hesitation, without inflection, like a fact that had always been true and was only now being said out loud for the first time. "My wife, and that's our daughter." Behind him, he felt rather than heard Mara's breath, a single soft intake, the sound of someone stepping off a ledge they'd been standing on the edge of for a very long time. Halley looked between them, looked at Lily, who was looking back at him with 9 years of Pacific Island steadiness and a complete absence of fear, looked at the satellite phone in his hand. "Mr. Cole," he said carefully, "my understanding is that—" "Your understanding is from a man who hasn't seen this woman in 10 years, Daniel said, "and who sent you to the middle of the Pacific Ocean instead of coming himself." He reached into his front pocket and held up the brass compass. The right one, his grandfather's, the one he'd had since he was 18. "My grandfather gave me this. There are 2 of them. The other one has been in her pocket for 10 years. He looked at Halley. "We've been here since your employer ran out of ways to keep us apart." Halley was silent for a moment. Lily walked forward, unhurried, straight-spined, her drawings tucked under her arm, and stood directly beside Daniel. She looked up at Halley with those dark eyes that saw everything and flinched at nothing. "I'm Lily," she said. "I've been on this island for 193 days. I'm 9 years old and I'd like to go home now, please." A brief pause. "We have very specific documentation requests. My father will explain them." Halley looked at the 9-year-old girl who had just referred to the man beside her as her father, with the complete certainty of someone stating a compass heading. He looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. "There are 2 crew members with this Zodiac," Daniel said quietly. "There's a ship's captain on that vessel, who's required by international maritime law to file a rescue report with every person's name and status, exactly as stated by the rescued party. You have a satellite phone. Whatever call you were going to make him, you can make it, but the report's already happening." A long silence. The Zodiac rocked in the gentle water inside the reef. The ridge fire had burned itself down to a pale thread of smoke in the growing morning light. All that effort, all those days, reduced at last to this: a man in good shoes in the sand, running the math on what he'd been sent to do versus what was actually in front of him. Halley put the phone in his pocket. "The captain is ready to receive you," he said. The Canton Star's mess hall was too bright and too warm and smelled overwhelmingly of diesel fuel and instant coffee, and Lily sat at the metal table and ate a bowl of canned chicken soup with the focused reverence of someone consuming something sacred. "This is the best thing I have ever eaten," she said without looking up. "You said that about the papaya on day 37? Mara said. "I was wrong about the papaya." She finished the soup. "May I have more, please?" One of the Filipino crew members, a young man who had been visibly uncertain whether he was allowed to find the child charming and had decided he was, went to get more without being asked. They were alone in the corner of the mess, Halley having retreated to the satellite communications room on some pretense that was probably exactly what it appeared to be. Daniel had spoken to the captain, a serious, weathered Norwegian named Eriksson, who had handled the intake interview with the efficiency of someone who spent his life managing emergencies and had no interest in the parts that weren't his business. Name: Daniel Cole. Next of kin: Mara Cole, wife. Child: Lily Cole, daughter. Origin vessel: Marianne, San Diego Registry. Duration of survival: 62 days. The captain had written it down without comment, had shaken Daniel's hand and told him the rescue report would be filed with Pacific Maritime Rescue in Guam and that they would reach Guam in approximately 19 hours. 19 hours. Then civilization. Then phones and hospitals and lawyers and a man in a high office somewhere with 40 million reasons to make this complicated. He was watching Lily accept her second bowl of soup when Mara said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her. "On the beach. What you said to him." Her hands were around a mug of coffee. Real coffee, hot coffee. The first in 62 days for him and 193 for her. And she was holding it more like a thing to hold than a thing to drink. You didn't have to say that. No, he said. I wanted to. She looked at him over the edge of her mug. Those gray-green eyes that were the color of the water inside the reef on a cloudy morning. Mara Cole, she said, like she was trying on the sound of it. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. The corner of her mouth. I've been Mara Voss for 9 years because being anything else wasn't safe. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a name that was a choice. She paused. That's all. She looked down at her coffee. Lily, without looking up from her soup, said, I like Cole better anyway. Voss sounds like a villain's name. They both looked at her. It does a little, Daniel said. Objectively, Lily confirmed, and had more soup. Hallie came back an hour later. He pulled a chair across the table from Daniel, set his phone face down between them, sat with his hands folded, the body language of someone who'd had a conversation that rearranged something and was working with the new arrangement. I'm going to tell you what I was sent here to do, he said. And then I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Those are not the same thing. Daniel waited. I was sent to confirm Mara Voss's location and status and report back, to facilitate a fractional hesitation, transfer of custody proceedings that might be initiated. The coffee mug in Mara's hand went still. Custody of a child whose legal existence he doesn't know about, Daniel said. He does know. Hallie kept his voice flat. The boat's departure manifest from Guam was filed under her name with a passenger listed as L. Voss, child, age 8. He's known about the child for approximately 3 months. He retained counsel in Guam shortly after. The mess hall hummed with the ship's engines. Outside the porthole, the Pacific slid by, flat and enormous and blue. And what are you going to do? Daniel said. Hallie looked at him for a long moment. Then at Lily, who was quietly braiding a strip of the plastic straw she'd been given with her soup, already making something. I'm going to file my report to my client confirming 3 survivors recovered from position 808°22 north, 149°17 east. A couple and their child. He picked up his phone. The rest will require lawyers, which you need. He slid the phone halfway across the table. I have no interest in being the person who pulls a 9-year-old off a rescue ship. Daniel looked at the phone. Then he looked at Mara. She met his eyes and something passed between them. The specific, silent conversation of 2 people who had been stripped of everything and found they still had this, the ability to read each other across a table, to know, without discussing it, that the next move was the same move. He picked up the phone and dialed the one number he had memorized from before the Marianne went down. Because some numbers you memorized, you just did. The way you kept the compass in your pocket and not in a bag. It rang twice. This is attorney Catherine Marsh. Kath, it's Daniel Cole. I'm on a ship in the Pacific and I need the best family law attorney you know, and I need them on a plane to Guam tonight. A pause that contained a whole history of knowing a person. You're alive, she said. Yeah, there's more to the story. There always is with you. He could hear her reaching for something. A pen, a keyboard, the instruments of a person who was already solving. Tell me. They docked in Guam at 11:14 a.m. The harbor was everything the island wasn't. Engine noise, diesel exhaust. The sharp smell of fish market 2 docks over, voices layered on voices in 3 languages, and the particular aggressive cheerfulness of a port that had commerce to conduct, and no interest in stopping to explain itself. Lily stood at the Canton Star's rail as they came in and said nothing for a long time. She was looking at all of it, the cranes, the trucks, the shops beyond the dock fence with signs in the windows, with the expression of someone who has read extensively about a country and is now standing in it and recalibrating everything they thought they knew. It's louder than I remembered, she said finally. You were very young when you were last somewhere like this, Mara said. I know. She was quiet another moment. Then, is Grandpa Frank going to be here? No, Daniel said. He was certain of that much. Frank Voss did not come to places himself. He sent people to places. But his people will be, and so will ours. Catherine Marsh's colleague had arrived in Guam at 9:00 a.m., a family attorney named David Reyes, who had met them at the harbor with a briefcase, and the focused energy of someone who had read a case summary on the flight and arrived already working. He had spoken to Daniel for 4 minutes on a satellite handoff before docking, and had used the phrase adverse custody filing twice and preemptive documentation 3 times, which was enough for Daniel to understand that Hallie had not been wrong about Frank Voss's intentions. They were off the ship in 20 minutes. Through the harbor authorities' survivor registration, quick and businesslike. The harbor master stamping 3 documents with the efficiency of a man who processed rescued sailors 4 times a year and had no patience for drama, and into the civilian terminal, where Reyes was waiting. The terminal was a medium-sized room with plastic chairs and a vending machine and 2 women at a processing desk, and 3 other people waiting. Normal, ordinary. The room where everything went from ocean to land. At the far end of the room, near the exit, stood a man in a charcoal suit. He was perhaps 65 years old, silver-haired, with a stillness about him that wasn't ease. It was control. The stillness of a man who had trained himself never to fidget because fidgeting conceded something. Daniel had met him once for 2 hours, over a dinner that had been entirely performance. He recognized the stillness before the face. Frank Voss was here himself, which meant this mattered to him more than he'd been willing to send a representative for. Mara saw him half a second after Daniel did. He felt her hand find his arm, not gripping, just contact, the way you touched something solid when the ground shifted. Lily saw him last, stopped walking. She looked at the silver-haired man in the suit the way she looked at everything, directly, without flinching, evaluating. She looked at him for a full 5 seconds. Then she looked up at Daniel. "That's him," she said. Not a question. "Yes, he's smaller than I thought." She said it without judgment, the way you noted a navigational landmark that turned out to be less significant than the chart suggested. She walked forward. Daniel's heart rate did something complex, but he matched her pace and they crossed the terminal floor. All 3 of them, Mara on his left, Lily between them, toward Frank Voss, who had not moved and whose controlled stillness now contained something it hadn't from across the room. Surprise. He had not expected this specific approach. Mara. His voice was calibrated. Warm, with an edge, the voice of a man who knew how to perform love as leverage. Dad. Hers was not. He looked at Lily with the assessment in his eyes that Daniel had last seen on the Zodiac. The half-second calculation of a man reading a situation for variables. "I'm Lily," she said. "You're my grandfather." She said it with the same tone she said everything. Factual, direct, no performance in either direction. "I know what you did to make my mom leave. I know why you're here. I think you should know that whatever you're planning isn't going to work." She held out her hand. "Nice to meet you." Frank Voss looked at the outstretched hand of his 9-year-old granddaughter. Whatever he'd prepared for, it wasn't this. He shook it. Lily nodded once, satisfied, and stepped slightly back, the step of a person who had said what they came to say and was now allowing the adults to conduct their portion of the proceedings. Daniel took the compass out of his pocket. He held it out flat on his palm between himself and Frank Voss, not pointing it at the man, not as a weapon, just holding it visible, the brass catching the terminal's fluorescent light. "She kept hers," Daniel said, "for 10 years, while she was running, while she was alone, while she was building a life on the other side of the ocean from the one you interrupted." He kept his voice level. "That's not a woman you controlled. That's a woman who survived you. There's a difference." Frank Voss looked at the compass. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and complicated that wasn't remorse but was adjacent to it, the way a shadow was adjacent to what cast it. "I have counsel here," he said. "The default, when the prepared speech didn't fit." "So do we," Daniel said. "Reyes." He didn't look away from Voss. "Already filed," Reyes said from 2 steps behind them. "Voluntary family reunification documentation signed by both parents, child consent recorded by witness, preempts any adverse filing under Guam jurisdiction." A pause. "Good morning, Mr. Voss." The stillness Frank Voss carried had been an asset his entire life. It failed him now just slightly, a fractional tightening around the eyes, the tell of a man who understood that the move he'd prepared no longer existed. "She's my granddaughter," he said. "Yes," Mara said. Her voice was quiet and clear, and in it Daniel could hear the 9 years of distance and the 10 before that and everything she'd carried in the space between. "She is, and she'll know you if she chooses to. That's her choice." She stepped forward. 1 step, closing the space her father had always used as a buffer zone. "But you don't get to use her, and you don't get to take her. Not from me and not from him." Frank Voss looked at his daughter for a long moment. The terminal hummed around them. The vending machine in the corner made a mechanical click. Somewhere outside, a horn went in the harbor. "You look like your mother," he said. Low, unexpected, the voice of a different man. Briefly, the man behind the money, behind the leverage, behind the stillness. When she was young. Mara held his gaze. I know. Something in Frank Voss's face settled. Not surrendered. Not changed, but settled. The way a ship settled when the sea stopped arguing with it. The way old grief settled when you finally stopped fighting it. He looked at Lily one more time. He looked at the compass in Daniel's hand. Then he picked up his jacket from the chair beside him. He'd set it down, which meant he'd been here longer than his entrance implied, which meant whatever he'd intended to do here had taken longer to dissolve than it was showing, and he walked toward the exit. His counsel fell in step behind him. Hallie, who had come in behind them without Daniel noticing, watched him go. At the door, Voss stopped. He didn't turn around. The people I work with, he said to the exit. They're not people you negotiate with. I want you to understand that I am the better option. A pause. I'm not saying this as a threat. I'm saying it because it's true and because she... Another pause. Fractional, like the word had caught on something. Deserves to know what the real threat looks like. He went out the door. The terminal breathed. Lily looked at the door he'd gone through. Then at Mara, then at Daniel. That was interesting, she said. Daniel laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a controlled one. A real one from the chest. The kind that came from the thing that had been coiled tight for 62 days finally releasing. It lasted 4 seconds. He pressed his hand to his eyes for a moment. Mara looked at him and then started laughing too, which she clearly hadn't expected to do, and it was the sound he remembered. Low and surprised and real. The laugh she'd had in Seattle in the kitchen. The one that wasn't for anyone else's benefit. Lily watched them both with patient interest. Are you okay? She asked. Yes, Mara said, still laughing slightly. You seem slightly unhinged. We've been on an island for a while, Daniel said. I know, I was there. But the corner of her mouth, the same corner as her mother. The three of them stood outside the harbor terminal in the Guam afternoon, which was hot and salt-scented and full of the sound of traffic and birds, and the distant crash of surf, and absolutely nothing like their island, and exactly as oceanic. Reyes was on his phone. Hallie had disappeared. The harbor moved around them, indifferent and purposeful and completely uninterested in what had just happened inside. Mara opened her hand. The left compass. The brass one, slightly dented, the inscription inside worn smooth by a decade of hands. She held it at the level between them, not extending it, not withdrawing it, offering it. He said, "True north always finds you," she said. His grandfather's words, the ones on both compasses, the inscription neither of them had needed to read in years. I didn't understand it when you gave it to me. I thought it was about navigation. It's not about navigation, he said. No. She looked at the compass in her palm. It's about the thing you keep coming back to, the thing that stays true when everything else changes. A breath. I kept coming back to it. Her eyes came up to his. I want you to know that. Wherever I was, whatever island, whatever year, this was still the heading. He took the compass from her hand. He closed his fingers around it. Left compass in left hand, right in right, both at once for the first time in his life. And it was the weight of something completed, something that had been navigating toward this specific moment for a very long time. True north always finds you, he said. His grandfather's voice easy now, warm. Mara nodded. Her eyes were bright and she wasn't fighting it this time. He put both compasses in his pocket next to each other, where they'd presumably always been meant to be, and he reached for her hand. She gave it. Her fingers were still slightly rough from 193 days of island work, and his were still calloused from 62, and they fit the way they'd always fit, like two things that had found their shape against each other. Lily stood beside them and looked at their joined hands with the satisfied expression of someone whose efficiency analysis had proven correct. Okay, she said. What now? Food, Mara said. Real food, Lily specified. Not fish. Definitely not fish, Daniel agreed. And then what? He looked at Mara. Mara looked at him. There was a man who might still be a problem. There were lawyers and documents and years of untangled threads. There was a world that needed to know about the family that the Pacific had decided to put together on a 2-mile island off the main route. And that world was complicated and expensive and was not going to be simple. None of that was what Lily was asking. Then we figure out what home looks like, Daniel said. For all three of us. Lily thought about this. I get my own room. You get your own room. With space for drawing. With space for drawing. And a window that faces the ocean. A pause. I don't want to not be able to see it. He understood that. He thought he was always going to understand that about her. Window that faces the ocean, he said. Done. She nodded once, the nod of a person registering a confirmed provision. Then she reached up and took one hand from each of them, her right in Mara's left, her left in Daniel's right, and started walking toward the street, leading the way with the sure-footed confidence of a child who had been navigating by the ocean her entire life and had decided this direction was exactly right. The sun was high and very bright, and the harbor smelled like salt and fuel, and the particular specific smell of a world that was still in the process of being figured out. The compass in Daniel's pocket was quiet and solid and pointed, the way it always pointed, toward whatever came next. They walked into the Guam afternoon, together, not perfectly, not finished, not without the hard things still ahead, but, and this was the thing that mattered, the thing the ocean had taken 9 months and 10 years and 193 days and 62 days to arrange, together. Months later, in a rented house in Monterey that faced the ocean because of course it did, Lily taped her last island drawing to the wall above her desk, the figure on the beach, the one she'd made on day 60 before anyone had arrived. She looked at it for a moment, then she added in small, neat charcoal letters at the bottom, Day 1. Mara found it there on a Thursday morning and stood in the doorway for a long time. She went downstairs. She put the left compass on the kitchen table. Daniel came in from the yard and saw it. He put the right compass next to it. They looked at each other across the kitchen in the full morning light coming off the water. True north. It finds you,